Bookmark. The airport buzzed with the chaotic rhythm of early morning travelers. The rumble of rolling suitcases, the hurried clicks of footsteps, and the distant echoes of overhead announcements blended into the backdrop. Rain streaked the tall glass windows, casting a muted gray glow over the terminal. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed brighter, illuminating Gate 41, where Maya Brooks, a newly promoted black female pilot in her early 30s, stood reviewing the day's flight plan. Maya's pride radiated in the calm, deliberate way she carried herself. Her navy blue uniform, crisp and tailored, reflected the significance of her position. Beneath her cap, her hair was neatly tied back, and she walked with an air of quiet confidence. Though the terminal bustled around her, Maya moved with the grace of someone who had long envisioned this moment. Every long hour of training, every barrier she had faced as a woman of color in aviation, had led to this. It wasn't just another day. It was one of her first flights as captain. The storm clouds gathering outside didn't shake her readiness. Maya thrived under pressure, knowing how rare it was to stand where she did. Now, she awaited the final crew briefing before boarding the plane that would take her and her passengers through the looming weather. A few gates down, Evelyn Carter waited at the check-in counter, her frustration as sharp as her meticulously tailored outfit. A middle-aged white woman with platinum blonde hair styled into a sleek bob, Evelyn's clothing, a blend of ivory and soft gold, spoke of quiet luxury. A silk scarf knotted carefully at her neck bore the initials of a designer brand, and she clutched a handbag embossed with gold lettering. Evelyn was heading to a destination wedding in Phoenix, and the morning's flight delays gnawed at her patience. Each tap of her manicured nails on the counter was a passive-aggressive reminder to the gate agent that she was on a tight schedule. As the attendant scanned her boarding pass, Evelyn's gaze drifted across the terminal and landed on Maya, who stood a short distance away, reviewing her notes. Evelyn's brow creased. Her eyes traced the 4 golden stripes across Maya's uniform. The realization took a moment to sink in, and when it did, her lips thinned into a tight smirk. Turning to the agent, she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to be heard, but loud enough for Maya to catch it. "I suppose they're letting just anyone fly these days." Evelyn murmured, her words laced with sarcasm. Maya heard the comment but didn't flinch. It wasn't the first time. She had grown accustomed to subtle remarks, skeptical glances, and doubting expressions over the years. Normally, she brushed them off like dust on her jacket, but today, on such a critical flight, the words felt heavier. Without acknowledging Evelyn's stare, Maya tucked her clipboard under her arm and walked toward the staff lounge, leaving the tension behind her. Her footsteps were steady, but the weight of Evelyn's gaze followed her like a shadow. As the boarding call for Flight 637 echoed through the speakers, Evelyn rose with a sigh, gathering her carry-on and making her way to the gate. First-class perks ensured she was among the first to board, and she reveled in the privilege. Yet, as she approached the aircraft, her irritation swelled once more. At the door of the plane, Maya greeted passengers as they stepped on board. Her polished uniform and calm smile set the tone for the flight. Evelyn stopped abruptly. Her eyes widened. "Excuse me?" Evelyn called over to a nearby flight attendant, gesturing toward Maya with a tilt of her head. "Is that her? Is she the pilot?" The flight attendant offered a polite nod. "Yes, ma'am, that's Captain Brooks. She'll be flying us to Phoenix today." Evelyn's lips twisted as she shook her head slightly. "I don't think this is safe. I'd like to speak with someone in charge." The attendant's professionalism didn't waver. "Captain Brooks is one of our best pilots, ma'am. You're in very capable hands." Evelyn crossed her arms. No, I've been flying for decades and I've never." Her words trailed off as she chose them carefully. "I just don't feel comfortable with this. I need to speak with a manager." The attendant's eyes flickered to Maya, silently gauging the situation. Maya caught Evelyn's sharp glance and, though it wasn't necessary, decided to step forward. With a steady, even tone, Maya met Evelyn's gaze. "Ma'am, I can assure you, you're in safe hands. I've trained extensively, and I take the responsibility of every passenger very seriously." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Do you now?" she replied coolly. "I'm not sure I can trust that. I don't know how someone like you ended up in this position." The words hung thick in the air, the meaning clear to anyone within earshot. A few nearby passengers exchanged awkward glances. Maya's grip on the doorframe tightened for a brief second, but she let the tension dissolve with a breath. "I understand your concern, ma'am. I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't qualified. This flight is under my care, and I won't let anything jeopardize it." Evelyn's eyes flicked away dismissively as she adjusted the strap of her bag. "We'll see about that," she muttered under her breath, stepping past Maya to find her seat. As Evelyn settled into her plush first-class seat, Maya returned to the cockpit, preparing for takeoff. She could feel Evelyn's doubt lingering in the air like the storm clouds outside. But Maya knew better than to let it distract her. The sky ahead was turbulent, but Maya was ready. Maya Brooks met Evelyn Carter's gaze with unwavering calm. The weight of Evelyn's words, unspoken yet loud, settled over the cabin like a heavy fog. Passengers nearby exchanged nervous glances, sensing the tension. Maya stood firm, her voice even. "I understand your concern, ma'am," Maya said, her professionalism unwavering. "But I assure you, I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't more than qualified. This flight is under my command, and nothing will compromise that." Evelyn's lips curled into a tight smirk. "We'll see," she muttered under her breath as she strode down the aisle, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. In first class, Evelyn settled into seat 3A, crossing her legs as she glanced around with irritation. The hum of passengers boarding did nothing to ease her mood. She shot quick, disapproving looks at the flight crew, eyeing each attendant as if expecting incompetence. A young mother with chestnut hair sat across the aisle, helping her son fasten his seatbelt. As she tucked him in, she caught Evelyn's scowl. Evelyn leaned over, lowering her voice, but ensuring it carried far enough. "Can you believe they let just anyone fly these days?" Evelyn whispered, her tone dripping with disdain. "It's as if standards don't matter anymore." The mother's expression stiffened, but she remained polite. "I trust the airline hires the best for the job," she replied, gently brushing her son's hair aside. The firmness in her voice made it clear the conversation was over. Evelyn leaned back with a huff, folding her arms. Dissatisfaction simmered beneath her cool facade. She whispered again, this time to no one in particular. "This is ridiculous. I'm not risking my life for their social experiments." Across the aisle, the mother caught Evelyn's words but said nothing. Other passengers shifted in their seats, a few exchanging subtle glances of disapproval. Evelyn remained oblivious, convinced her discomfort was justified. Up front in the cockpit, Maya sat alongside her co-pilot, Daniel Harris. Daniel, a veteran pilot with graying hair and an easy demeanor, had flown alongside Maya on several occasions. He trusted her completely. "You good?" Daniel asked, glancing over as they ran through pre-flight checks. Maya's hands moved steadily over the controls. "Yeah," she said, though a trace of frustration lingered in her voice, "just dealing with the usual." Daniel chuckled softly. "People can be something else. But don't let it stick, Maya. You've more than earned your place here." Maya exhaled slowly, feeling the tension ease from her shoulders. "Thanks, Dan. I'm ready to get this bird in the air." As the final boarding announcement echoed through the cabin, the flight attendants secured the doors. Maya tightened her grip on the controls, focused on the turbulent weather ahead. She had flown through storms before, and today would be no different. Back in first class, Evelyn's irritation bubbled over. As a flight attendant passed by, Evelyn lifted her hand, signaling her dissatisfaction. The attendant approached with a polite smile. "Is there something I can assist you with, ma'am?" Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "I still don't feel comfortable with this situation. I've never heard of someone like her flying a plane. I think this is irresponsible." The flight attendant's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Ma'am, Captain Brooks is fully certified and highly respected. I assure you there's no cause for concern." Evelyn's eyes narrowed further. She crossed her arms. "Unbelievable," she muttered, loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "I'll be filing a complaint the moment we land." The attendant gave a polite nod. "If there's nothing else, ma'am, I'll let you get comfortable. We'll be departing shortly." As the flight attendant walked away, Evelyn's gaze swept the cabin. A few passengers looked away, while others glanced at her with subtle disapproval. Evelyn paid no mind. In her eyes, she was the only one with the good sense to speak up. With all passengers aboard, Maya and Daniel prepared for takeoff. Maya's grip tightened slightly as she guided the plane along the taxiway. The engines roared to life, vibrating beneath her fingertips. She felt the familiar rush as the plane lifted from the ground, slicing through the rain-soaked sky. Despite the turbulence that loomed, Maya's hands remained steady on the controls, her focus absolute. In the cabin, Evelyn gripped her armrests as the plane climbed. Her frustration mingled with unease. Her eyes flicked toward the cockpit door, as if waiting for it to open and reveal someone more suitable for the job. Across the aisle, the young mother watched Evelyn's growing agitation with quiet patience. After a few minutes, she leaned over. "I think it's wonderful having Captain Brooks at the helm," the mother said gently. "It's good for my son to see someone like her in charge." Evelyn scoffed. "We'll see if you still feel that way when the turbulence hits," she replied coolly, turning away. The young mother sighed but chose not to press the matter further. She focused on her son, helping him adjust his small travel pillow. As the plane soared higher into the storm, Maya felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had navigated storms before, both in the air and on the ground. Today would be no different. Evelyn Carter scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Someone to look up to," she muttered, shaking her head. "We'll see about that." Dismissing the young mother's comment, Evelyn leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms tightly. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she closed her eyes, though her sour expression remained firmly in place. Despite her attempt to relax, Evelyn couldn't shake the nagging feeling that today's flight wouldn't be ordinary, but the discomfort she felt had little to do with safety. Deep down, she sensed that this experience would force her to confront something she wasn't ready to face. As Flight 637 climbed higher, the plane eventually settled into cruising altitude. A sense of calm filled the cabin. Passengers eased into their seats, some dozing off, others flipping through magazines or scrolling on their phones. The aisles grew quiet, except for the soft hum of the engines and the occasional clink of glasses as flight attendants moved through the cabin, serving drinks and snacks. Yet, while the cabin appeared peaceful, a storm was brewing, both outside and within. Evelyn shifted in her seat, unable to relax. She threw cautious glances around the cabin, occasionally locking her gaze on the cockpit door, as if half expecting someone to step out and assure her this was all a mistake. But no one did. Outside, clouds thickened. Captain Maya Brooks and her co-pilot, Daniel Harris, closely monitored the storm system ahead. "It's going to get bumpy," Daniel remarked, his eyes fixed on the radar. Maya nodded, her hands steady on the controls. "I see it. Let's ride it out." She adjusted the autopilot settings, anticipating the turbulence. Maya's focus never wavered. She had flown through worse, and nothing, least of all the doubt from a passenger in first class, would shake her confidence now. Moments later, Maya's voice echoed softly over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Brooks speaking. We're currently cruising at 35,000 feet and expecting light turbulence due to the weather ahead. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We appreciate your cooperation and thank you for flying with us." Most passengers barely reacted, continuing with their conversations or quietly sipping their drinks. But Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Her jaw tightened as she flagged down a passing flight attendant. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, her voice clipped and impatient. "Can you tell me why the captain thinks she can handle this turbulence? This is no time for experiments." The flight attendant's polite smile didn't waver, though a flicker of surprise crossed her face. "Captain Brooks is highly trained and more than capable, ma'am. Please rest assured you're in good hands." Evelyn wasn't convinced. "I'd like to know her experience level. How many flights has she done? How long has she been flying?" The flight attendant maintained her professionalism. "I understand your concerns, ma'am, but Captain Brooks has completed rigorous training and logged extensive flight hours. I assure you, she's qualified." Evelyn exhaled sharply. "I'll be the judge of that," she muttered just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One or two glanced at Evelyn with thinly veiled annoyance, but chose not to engage. In the cockpit, Maya and Daniel carefully navigated the rough patches as the plane shuddered slightly. The seatbelt sign flickered on, prompting passengers to buckle in. In first class, Evelyn gripped her armrests, her knuckles turning pale as the plane dipped. Every rattle of the cabin only deepened her agitation. She cut sharp glances toward the cockpit door, her eyes darting nervously. Across the aisle, the young mother, Emily, noticed Evelyn's growing discomfort. Her son, now asleep against her shoulder, stirred lightly with the movement of the plane. Emily glanced at Evelyn, her expression soft but steady. "Ma'am," Emily said quietly, "turbulence is normal in weather like this. I'm sure everything's fine." Evelyn's head snapped toward her. "Normal? There's nothing normal about this." She motioned subtly toward the cockpit. "I just don't know how anyone can feel comfortable knowing who's in charge up there." Emily's eyes darkened slightly. "With all due respect," she said firmly, "the airline knows what they're doing. I trust that Captain Brooks has more than earned her place." Evelyn let out a short, derisive laugh. "Trust? I've trusted airlines before, but they've never hired someone so." She paused, carefully choosing her next words. "Inexperienced. I won't sit quietly while my safety is at risk." Her voice had grown louder, and nearby passengers began to take notice. A man seated a few rows ahead turned in his seat, his brow furrowed. "Ma'am," he said, his tone calm but firm, "maybe you should relax. The crew is doing their job, and we're all just trying to have a peaceful flight." Evelyn bristled. "Oh, I'm sorry," she replied sarcastically. "I didn't realize that voicing legitimate concerns counted as complaining. If you want to risk your life, that's your business." The flight attendant returned, sensing the tension rising. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to lower your voice. Other passengers are becoming concerned." Evelyn's eyes flashed with indignation. "Concerned about what? The fact that I'm the only one here who sees the danger? Unbelievable." Her voice, no longer a whisper, echoed slightly through the cabin. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, and Emily gently patted her son's back, trying to shift his attention away from Evelyn's escalating frustration. As the turbulence intensified, Evelyn's complaints grew louder. But for every word she spoke, Maya's steady hands remained on the controls, guiding the plane safely forward. Evelyn Carter's voice cut through the soft murmurs of the cabin, her frustration bubbling over. She threw her hands in the air, her tone sharp and unrelenting. "A comfortable experience? This is about more than comfort. I've flown plenty of times, and I've never seen this kind of irresponsibility. How did someone like her even get hired?" Across the aisle, Emily, the young mother, couldn't stay silent. She leaned forward, her expression calm but eyes locked firmly on Evelyn. "Someone like her? Why don't you just say what you mean?" Emily's voice was steady but cold. Evelyn sneered, folding her arms. "Oh, don't play that card. You know exactly what I'm saying. If the airline's going to put unqualified people in charge, just to meet some diversity quota, they could at least warn us." Emily's face tightened, her tone laced with restrained anger. "You're out of line. She's more qualified than most people I know. I'm sure of it by now." Other passengers began shifting in their seats, murmurs spreading through the cabin. Some cast brief, irritated glances at Evelyn, while others stared down at their laps, hoping to avoid the brewing confrontation. Evelyn, however, seemed to feed off the attention, her voice growing louder. "You can all sit there and act self-righteous, but I have the right to feel safe," Evelyn said, her eyes scanning the passengers. "This is outrageous, and I will be letting the airline know exactly how I feel." A flight attendant approached, her usual polite expression now replaced with a firm resolve. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to lower your voice. We want to ensure a pleasant experience for everyone on board." Evelyn turned toward the attendant, sizing her up with disdain. "Oh, so now I'm the problem?" she snapped. "Unbelievable. This is what happens when you compromise standards. You'll thank me later when this so-called pilot lands us safely, if she even can." Emily's young son tugged on her sleeve, his voice a whisper. "Mom, why is she being so mean?" Emily's face softened as she glanced down at him. "Some people don't understand that everyone deserves respect," she said gently, smoothing his hair. Evelyn overheard, her face twisting in irritation. "Respect?" she scoffed, her voice loud enough to carry over the quiet hum of the engines. "How am I supposed to respect someone who doesn't deserve to be up there?" A few rows ahead, a man who had been pretending not to listen finally turned around. His voice was firm but restrained. "Enough. We all heard you. Can you let the rest of us enjoy the flight now?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed as her knuckles whitened against the armrest. "Oh, I'll stop," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "But if anything happens, you'll all regret sitting here pretending this is normal." As if on cue, the plane trembled with a deeper pocket of turbulence. Passengers gasped softly, gripping their armrests as the aircraft dipped briefly before leveling out. Maya Brooks' calm voice floated over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit more turbulence as we pass through this system. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We expect to clear it shortly. Thank you for your patience." Evelyn clenched her jaw, throwing smug glances at those around her, silently screaming, "I told you so." However, most passengers had grown tired of her theatrics. Many returned to their books, closed their eyes, or tuned her out entirely. In the cockpit, Maya's grip remained firm as she guided the plane through the turbulence. She kept her focus locked ahead, her hands steady. Daniel glanced sideways at her. "You're handling this like a pro, Maya. Don't let her get in your head." Maya allowed herself a brief smile, though her eyes never left the instrument panel. "Thanks, Dan. It's not the first time someone's doubted me. I'm used to it by now." Daniel nodded knowingly. "The ones who matter know what you're capable of. The rest? Just noise." Maya exhaled, the turbulence slowly fading as the plane broke through to clearer skies. Back in the cabin, the subtle shift to smoother air was palpable. Passengers visibly relaxed, and the tension that had filled the space slowly melted away. Evelyn sat rigid, her arms crossed, scowling out the window as if daring the clouds to prove her right. The flight attendant returned to her seat. She knelt beside Evelyn, her tone polite but unmistakably firm. "Ma'am, I need to remind you, any further disruptions may lead to consequences. This is your final warning." Evelyn glared but said nothing. Her lips moved in a low mutter as she sank back into her seat. Across the aisle, Emily handed her son a small book, offering him a reassuring smile. Before turning her attention away, she caught Evelyn's eye for a fleeting moment. With a quiet but sincere tone, Emily spoke softly. "Sometimes it's good to give people a chance. You might be surprised." Evelyn Carter scowled, unwilling to respond to Emily's words. Yet, despite her stubborn silence, the young mother's comment echoed uncomfortably in the back of her mind. A small, irritating whisper she couldn't ignore. Though the turbulence outside eased, the atmosphere in Flight 637's cabin remained tense. Evelyn sat stiffly, arms crossed, her eyes narrowing at the passengers around her. Each glance of disapproval only stoked the fire of her indignation. The fact that anyone dared defend Captain Maya Brooks fueled Evelyn's frustration, twisting it into something darker. She stewed silently, the hum of the engines doing little to calm her. Minutes passed, but the storm within her had not yet settled. Finally, as if a switch flipped, Evelyn unbuckled her seatbelt with a sharp click and stood abruptly, ignoring the illuminated seatbelt sign overhead. Her sudden movement caught the attention of a flight attendant who approached swiftly, raising a hand in gentle caution. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to return to your seat. For your safety, the captain has requested all passengers remain seated." Evelyn's eyes flicked up and down the attendant with thinly veiled disdain. "Do you think I care what that so-called captain wants?" Evelyn snapped, stepping forward. "She shouldn't even be up there. This entire flight is a farce, and I'm not going to sit back and pretend otherwise." The flight attendant took a steady breath, planting herself in Evelyn's path. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to insist. You're causing a disruption." Evelyn's voice sharpened. "You don't get to tell me what to do. I paid for this seat, and I have the right to feel safe." Her words rang through the cabin, drawing curious and uneasy stares from nearby passengers. A few discreetly pulled out their phones, their cameras quietly capturing the escalating scene. The flight attendant's expression remained composed, but her patience visibly thinned. "Ma'am, please, let's not make this more difficult. Return to your seat." Ignoring the plea, Evelyn shoved past the attendant and stormed down the aisle, her heels clicking forcefully against the floor. Heads turned as she approached the cockpit door, her hand balled into a fist. With mounting fury, she pounded on the door. "Open up," she demanded, her voice rising. "I want to speak to the captain. Open this door now." Inside the cockpit, Maya Brooks and Daniel Harris exchanged quick glances, the thudding on the door impossible to miss. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat, concern flickering across his face. "We could call security the moment we land," he suggested quietly. Maya's eyes remained locked on the controls, her jaw tight. "Let's keep things steady for now," she replied calmly. "We'll handle it when we touch down." Evelyn continued to hammer on the cockpit door, her voice carrying through the cabin. "I know you can hear me. I have every right to know who's flying this plane." Finally, the flight attendant from earlier squeezed between Evelyn and the door, her tone more forceful this time. "Ma'am, step back immediately. This is your final warning. If you don't comply, we will have no choice but to restrain you." Evelyn spun around, fury flashing in her eyes. "Restrain me?" she scoffed. "For wanting to make sure this flight is safe? This is madness." Passengers began murmuring louder now, and a man from the economy cabin stepped forward, attempting to defuse the situation. "Ma'am," he said gently, raising his hands, "please, everyone here just wants to get through this flight peacefully. Let's return to our seats." Evelyn's head snapped toward him. "Don't tell me what to do. None of you understand. This is about my safety." Her voice cracked, laced with a growing hysteria that made those around her shrink back. And then, in a final act of rage, Evelyn raised her hand without warning, her palm connected sharply with the arm of the flight attendant standing closest to her. The slap echoed like a gunshot through the cabin. Gasps filled the air as the stunned attendant stumbled back, a red mark already blooming on her skin. For a brief moment, the cabin sat frozen in collective disbelief. Phones recorded the incident from multiple angles as Evelyn's face remained flushed with fury, unrepentant. Emily, across the aisle, gently turned her son away from the scene, shielding his eyes. The flight attendant regained her composure, her tone now like steel. "That's it," she said calmly but firmly. "You assaulted a crew member. You will be arrested when we land." She signaled to two other attendants, who stepped forward to carefully but firmly guide Evelyn back toward her seat. Evelyn thrashed in their grasp, muttering heatedly under her breath. But she could no longer fight against the hands securing her arms with soft restraints, ensuring she wouldn't cause further disruption. Despite her outward defiance, Evelyn's once proud demeanor began to crumble. Her eyes flicked bitterly to the cockpit, as if blaming Maya, someone she hadn't even seen, for everything that had unfolded. "This is her fault," Evelyn hissed to no one in particular. "She shouldn't be flying this plane. You're all too afraid to admit it." The attendants gently lowered her into her seat, fastening the restraint and ensuring she wouldn't be able to rise again until the plane landed. Evelyn's glare lingered, but her voice had lost its power. Passengers around her whispered quietly, their glances alternating between sympathy for the crew and disdain for Evelyn's actions. As the plane soared forward, Maya Brooks remained focused, her hands steady on the controls. She didn't need to hear Evelyn's outburst to know what had happened. Experience told her everything she needed to know. But Maya wasn't here to win Evelyn over. She was here to fly. Evelyn Carter sat stiffly, her restrained arms resting awkwardly on the seat. Though subdued, the fire in her eyes had not extinguished. Passengers murmured softly, their voices blending into a quiet wave of disbelief and relief. Across the aisle, Emily gently stroked her son's hair, leaning close to whisper, "Remember, sweetheart, people deserve respect, no matter who they are or what they look like." The man who had tried earlier to calm Evelyn shook his head as he returned to his seat, stealing one last glance at her. "Some people just don't get it," he muttered under his breath. Up front, Captain Maya Brooks remained locked into the flight's final leg. She heard the commotion behind the cockpit door, but kept her focus on guiding the plane. The weight of Evelyn's outburst pressed against her, yet she held firm, unwilling to let it disrupt the task at hand. Maya had been through worse, and she had flown through storms far more dangerous than a single unruly passenger. As the plane descended through the clouds, Maya exchanged a quick nod with Daniel Harris. Both knew that the moment they touched the ground, the situation with Evelyn would escalate further. The runway lights of Denver International Airport shimmered below as Flight 637 touched down with a smooth glide. Passengers exhaled with collective relief as the plane taxied to the gate. When the seatbelt sign flickered off, no one moved. A group of security personnel boarded swiftly, moving down the aisle with quiet authority. Evelyn straightened as she spotted them approaching. Her defiance reignited like a fading ember catching flame. "You're making a mistake," she hissed as one of the officers began undoing her restraints. "I'll have your jobs for this. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The officer remained silent, his face impassive as he guided her toward the exit. Passengers watched as Evelyn made her way down the aisle, her eyes scanning the cabin, searching for support she wouldn't find. A few shook their heads. Others watched in detached disbelief. Emily met Evelyn's gaze briefly, giving a small, almost imperceptible nod. She whispered something to her son, and the boy peeked up at Evelyn with curious but unafraid eyes. As Evelyn stepped off the plane, flashes from waiting cell phones captured her descent into the terminal. Some travelers paused to watch, while others documented the event with hushed commentary. In the cockpit, Maya took a long, steadying breath. The last of the passengers had disembarked, leaving behind the echoes of murmurs and scattered applause. Daniel rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You handled that like a pro," he said, his tone warm with quiet admiration. "Don't let her, or anyone, make you think otherwise." Maya's lips curved into a small but genuine smile. "Thanks, Dan. I won't." As they exited the plane, a small cluster of airline staff stood by the gate, waiting for her. A few applauded while others approached to shake her hand. Captain Brooks, one of the airline representatives, greeted with a warm smile. "The way you handled this situation was exceptional. I hope you know how much respect you've earned today." Maya dipped her head in gratitude. "Thank you. That means a lot." Passengers trickled past, offering words of quiet thanks. One elderly man tipped his hat while a young woman gave her a thumbs up as she passed by. Maya knew she hadn't changed Evelyn's perspective, but that didn't matter. In the eyes of the people who mattered, she had shown what true professionalism looked like. Evelyn Carter's fate unraveled swiftly. The moment security led her through the bustling terminal, her sharp heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing with misplaced authority. A small crowd gathered, watching intently as she was escorted toward a private room for further questioning. Phones rose in unison, recording each second. The hum of the terminal dimmed as travelers paused to take in the spectacle. Evelyn's face, flushed with anger and bruised pride, twisted in disbelief. To Evelyn, this entire ordeal was a grotesque misunderstanding. In her mind, she had been the victim, the only one brave enough to speak up. But to everyone else, she was a cautionary tale unfolding in real time. Inside the airport's private security room, Evelyn sat with her arms crossed, tapping her manicured nails against the table. Her mind spun with indignant thoughts, rehearsing the speech she would give when they realized their mistake. Meanwhile, Maya Brooks stepped through the terminal, her pace unhurried. The weight of the flight lingered, but with each step, relief began to take its place. A few lingering passengers approached, including Emily and her son. "Captain Brooks," Emily said softly, "thank you for everything. I'm glad my son got to see you fly today." Maya crouched slightly to meet the boy's eye level. "I'm glad you flew with me," she said with a smile. "Maybe one day, you'll be up there too." The boy grinned wide, nodding enthusiastically. As Maya watched them leave, she felt something shift inside, a quiet but steadfast sense of triumph. She hadn't just flown a plane, she had flown through prejudice, through doubt, and emerged stronger than ever. Evelyn Carter stood rigidly in the small, sterile room, arms crossed tightly across her chest. The security officer before her, a tall man with calm but unwavering eyes, gestured for her to sit. Evelyn didn't budge, her gaze locked defiantly with his, sharp and unflinching. "Ma'am," the officer began, his voice measured and firm, "we've received multiple reports of disruptive and violent behavior from witnesses on your flight. We need to discuss the consequences of your actions." Evelyn scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Consequences? For what? Speaking up when I felt unsafe?" Her words dripped with entitlement, the sneer unmistakable. The officer's expression didn't shift. "This goes beyond a simple complaint. Assaulting a flight attendant and refusing to comply with safety instructions is a serious offense. We have video evidence from several passengers. This is being taken very seriously." For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed Evelyn's face, but it was quickly replaced by indignation. "Unbelievable. I was trying to protect myself and everyone else. I did what anyone would have done in my position." The officer's patience wore thin. His tone cooled, though the authority in his voice remained. "Ma'am, your actions endangered the safety of everyone on board. That is unacceptable under any circumstances. I'll need you to stay here while we process a report." Without waiting for a response, the officer turned and stepped out, leaving Evelyn alone, her fists clenched at her sides, nails digging into her palms. The fire of anger simmered just beneath the surface, but unlike on the plane, there was no audience here, no one to glare at or intimidate. This was a world Evelyn couldn't control. Outside, word of the incident spread like wildfire. Clips of Evelyn's outburst and the slap she delivered to the flight attendant had already flooded social media. By the time Evelyn sat in that quiet room, hashtags like Flight 637 Meltdown and Respect for Captain Brooks were trending. Thousands of users chimed in, supporting Maya Brooks and condemning Evelyn's behavior. Passengers who had been on the flight shared first-hand accounts, praising Maya for her professionalism and commending the crew for their calm handling of the situation. Videos captured the moment Evelyn was led off the plane, her fiery gaze intact even as security restrained her. Maya Brooks walked through the terminal toward the airline's crew lounge. She kept her steps measured, shoulders squared. A long exhale escaped her lips as the adrenaline from the flight began to fade. Near the gate, a small group of passengers lingered. A few approached Maya hesitantly. "Captain Brooks," one man said, offering a warm smile, "I just wanted to thank you. You handled that situation with incredible grace. We appreciate it." Maya's professional composure softened. "Thank you," she replied sincerely. "I'm glad we got everyone here safely." The group dispersed, but one passenger lingered. Emily, the young mother from the flight, her son's small hand clasped tightly in hers. "Captain Brooks," Emily began, her voice soft but resolute, "I wanted to thank you. My son was nervous after everything that happened, but you made him feel safe. I don't think we'll forget that." Maya knelt slightly, meeting the boy's wide eyes with a kind smile. "Thank you for flying with me. You were very brave up there." The boy blinked, his gaze filled with quiet awe. "Are you a superhero?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Maya chuckled gently. "Not quite," she replied, "but I'll always make sure you're safe when you fly with me." Emily's smile softened as she watched the exchange. "We need more people like you up there. You made a difference today." Maya straightened, nodding gratefully. As Emily and her son walked away, a renewed sense of pride settled over her. This, more than the accolades or promotions, was why she had worked so hard to get here. Back in the security office, Evelyn's questioning concluded with little fanfare. Security decided to release her temporarily while they reviewed the charges. A stern warning was issued. Her actions would not go without consequences. As Evelyn exited, her face burned with frustration. The terminal's bustle felt louder, more scrutinizing than before. She could feel the weight of eyes following her every step, judging her in silence. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Pulling it from her purse, Evelyn glanced at the screen. Messages flooded her inbox, texts from family, friends, and acquaintances. Some expressed shock, others disappointment. A handful didn't hold back their outrage. One message from her sister stood out in bold letters. "Evelyn, what on earth were you thinking? You embarrassed the entire family." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She wasn't ready to face their scrutiny or acknowledge her fault. In her mind, she was the victim. The world, as far as she was concerned, had misinterpreted everything. She had been wronged, and no amount of video footage could convince her otherwise. But as she left the terminal and entered the cold night air, one thing was clear. The consequences were far from over. Evelyn Carter's world unraveled quickly. By the time she arrived at her home in Portland, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Notifications flooded her screen. Mentions, comments, and news alerts stacking like bricks in a wall she couldn't climb. Footage of her outburst on Flight 637 had gone viral, spreading far beyond the terminal. News outlets plastered headlines labeling her the disruptive passenger or Airport Evelyn. Hashtags like Evelyn on a plane and Justice for Captain Brooks trended across social media. The attention wasn't the kind Evelyn had ever sought, and now it felt suffocating. Her once carefully curated social media profiles, filled with vacation selfies, work events, and polished family photos, were now flooded with critical comments. Beneath images of sunsets and smiling brunch gatherings were strings of harsh words. "This you? The entitlement is unbelievable. Imagine having this much hate in your heart. The incident wasn't just a personal embarrassment, it had become a public discussion on prejudice, privilege, and professional integrity. Meanwhile, back at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, Captain Maya Brooks finally settled into the quiet comfort of the crew lounge. The hum of distant airport activity muffled behind the lounge doors provided a strange contrast to the storm of attention brewing online. As Maya sipped a cup of tea, her phone vibrated on the table beside her. Messages from friends, family, and colleagues poured in, each one brimming with support and admiration. A voice message from her sister, Olivia, played softly. "Maya, I saw the videos. You handled that with such grace. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. We're so proud of you." Maya's eyes softened as she listened, the warmth of her sister's words settling over her like a blanket. The path she had chosen wasn't easy, breaking barriers rarely was, but moments like these reminded her why she endured. She wasn't just flying planes. She was making space for those who would come after her. If a few more Evelyn Carters appeared along the way, so be it. Maya smiled as she glanced out the lounge window at the bustling terminal beyond. This was only the beginning. But for Evelyn, the descent into public scrutiny had only just begun. As the days passed, she found herself trapped beneath the weight of online outrage. Her employer, a prominent pharmaceutical company, had already sent an email. Subject: Urgent, Employee Conduct Review. "Miss Carter, we are aware of the incident involving Flight 637 and will be conducting a review regarding your future employment. You are placed on indefinite leave effective immediately." Though the email carefully avoided naming her outright, Evelyn knew. So did everyone else. Within hours, screenshots of the company's statement circulated online, fanning the flames further. In desperation, Evelyn crafted a lengthy post on her private Facebook page. She framed herself as a concerned passenger, claiming she felt unsafe due to turbulence and unfamiliarity with Captain Brooks' experience. "I was within my rights to ask questions," Evelyn wrote. "I acted out of concern for myself and the passengers around me. The backlash has been completely overblown." But instead of sympathy, the post backfired. Screenshots spread faster than she could control, and the comments that followed were merciless. "Concerned for yourself, not everyone else." "Accountability isn't optional, Evelyn. This just proves you still don't get it." Even Evelyn's closest friends began to distance themselves. Her sister Julia called one evening as the post gained traction. "Evelyn," Julia's voice crackled with frustration, "what were you thinking?" "I was protecting myself," Evelyn snapped, pacing her living room. "You know I get nervous flying, and then they put someone like her in charge? How was I supposed to feel safe?" Julia's sigh felt heavier than usual. "Evelyn, this isn't about your nerves. It's about the way you handled it, the things you said. You didn't just question her qualifications. You attacked who she was." Evelyn's defensiveness flared. "I'm being painted as some villain. I was just looking out for safety. Why is that so wrong?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Maybe because," Julia said quietly, "it wasn't about safety. It was about your prejudice. And deep down, I think you know that." The call ended, leaving Evelyn alone in the quiet hum of her living room, her certainty beginning to fracture beneath the weight of Julia's words. For the first time, doubt crept in. Evelyn Carter hung up the phone, her sister's words lingering like an unwelcome echo. "It's not about safety, it's about your prejudice. You don't even see it." The truth stung, but Evelyn's pride formed a stubborn wall, blocking any real reflection. Isolated and misunderstood, she clung to the belief that she was the victim, her defiance masking the slow crumble of certainty beneath her. On the other side of the country, Maya Brooks experienced a far different reality. When she returned to work, the ripple effects of Flight 637's viral fallout greeted her, not with hostility, but with overwhelming support. From fellow pilots to flight attendants and ground staff, Maya was met with handshakes, nods of respect, and words of encouragement. Her supervisor, David Lynn, even stopped her in the hallway outside the briefing room. "Captain Brooks," he said, offering a rare smile, "we've all been watching how you handled that situation. It was impressive." Maya gave a polite nod. "Thank you, David. I was just doing my job." David shook his head. "It was more than that. You showed leadership under pressure, exactly the kind of pilot this airline is proud to have. Angela Marshall wants to speak with you. Angela Marshall, the airline's vice president, rarely called directly. A few minutes later, Maya sat in a small office with her phone pressed to her ear. Captain Brooks, Angela's warm but professional tone filled the receiver. We've been following the incident closely. I wanted to thank you personally for the grace you showed under difficult circumstances. It didn't go unnoticed. Maya's grip tightened slightly around the phone. I appreciate that, Miss Marshall. I just did what I was trained to do. Angela's voice softened. It wasn't just training, Maya. You held yourself with patience and strength. We're nominating you for our Leadership Recognition Award. You deserve it. Maya felt the weight of the words, not with arrogance, but humility. Thank you, Miss Marshall. I'm honored. Hanging up, Maya allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The recognition wasn't something she had sought, but it felt good to know her hard work and resilience were acknowledged. As the weeks passed, the story of Flight 637 continued to gain traction. Media outlets reached out, eager to interview the pilot who had handled a high-profile in-flight disturbance with unwavering professionalism. Maya hesitated at first, unsure if stepping into the spotlight aligned with her quiet, steadfast approach. But after consulting Angela, she accepted. A few days later, Maya walked onto the set of a national morning show, the studio lights brighter than she'd anticipated. The audience clapped as she took her seat across from the host, a charismatic man named Sean Matthews. Captain Brooks, Sean began with a smile. I think I speak for everyone here when I say your story is inspiring. Can you walk us through how you felt in that moment, when a passenger challenged you so publicly? Maya took a breath, choosing her words carefully. Well, she began, my first focus was the safety of the crew and passengers. It wasn't easy to ignore personal attacks, but I reminded myself that I had a job to do. It was about keeping calm and ensuring everyone got home safely. Sean nodded, clearly impressed. When you see the overwhelming support you've received, how does that feel? Maya allowed a small smile. It's incredible. I never expected so many people to reach out. I hope this experience encourages others to stay strong and professional in the face of adversity. The audience erupted into applause, and Maya felt a warm surge of gratitude. Her story was no longer just about a single incident. It had become a symbol of quiet strength, integrity, and resilience. Not everyone applauded. Evelyn Carter sat in her small apartment, watching the interview with tightly crossed arms. Each word that left Maya's mouth felt like an attack, twisting Evelyn's frustration into something deeper. She's using this, Evelyn thought bitterly, milking it for attention. Her phone buzzed again, and this time the notification wasn't from social media. It was an email from her employer. Subject, termination of employment. The email was brief and cold, citing her disruptive behavior and how it clashed with the company's values. Evelyn stared at the screen, disbelief washing over her. She read the email twice, hoping for some hidden ambiguity. But there was none. Her career, the one she had spent years building, was gone. Over the next week, Evelyn's attempts to secure another job were met with silence. No company wanted to be associated with the woman whose face had become synonymous with airport meltdowns. Her savings dwindled, forcing her to leave her upscale apartment in the heart of Portland. She packed her belongings into boxes and relocated to a smaller, more modest unit on the outskirts of town. Each day, the walls seemed to press in a little tighter. Meanwhile, Maya's world continued to expand. Young women, particularly those of color, reached out to her with messages of gratitude. They saw in Maya something powerful, a symbol of possibility. At aviation conferences, Maya spoke openly about the barriers she faced and how she had learned to navigate them. It's not about proving others wrong, she told one audience, but about proving to yourself that you belong. No one can take that away from you. Maya's words resonated, her inbox filled with invitations to speak at schools, mentor young pilots, and serve on diversity panels. Her influence soared as Evelyn's life faded further from public view. In the end, Evelyn's name became a fleeting cautionary tale, while Maya's became a legacy. Captain Maya Brooks stood at the front of a packed auditorium, her presence commanding yet humble. She shared her journey, each word carefully chosen to inspire others to chase their dreams, no matter the obstacles. Her speeches had grown more frequent since the incident on Flight 637, but Maya never let the attention distract from her mission. She wasn't flying for applause or recognition. It had always been about the love of the skies, breaking barriers, proving that resilience and integrity would always outshine prejudice. Months later, as Maya walked through Denver International Airport, she noticed a young girl staring at her, wide-eyed and curious. Maya knelt down, smiling warmly. "Hi there. Are you a real pilot?" the girl asked softly, awe filling her voice. Maya's heart swelled as she nodded. "I sure am. Do you want to be a pilot too?" The girl's face lit up. "Yes, just like you." Reaching into her bag, Maya pulled out a small silver pin with the airline's logo and placed it gently in the girl's hand. "Remember," Maya said, her voice soft but firm, "if you work hard and believe in yourself, you can do anything. The sky's waiting for you." The girl's mother, standing nearby, mouthed a silent thank you, her eyes glistening with tears. As Maya rose and walked away, she felt lighter. These moments, quiet, genuine, and full of hope, were the truest reward. By simply being herself, she reminded others that the sky was within reach, no matter who they were. Meanwhile, Evelyn Carter faced a far colder reality. Stripped of the privileges she once assumed were permanent, Evelyn was left with nothing but the weight of her stubbornness. Her downfall had become a cautionary tale, a glaring reminder of what happens when prejudice goes unchecked. The viral videos faded from headlines, but Evelyn's life remained tangled in the aftermath. She avoided public spaces, too aware of the whispers and lingering glances. Even in solitude, she felt the invisible judgment of strangers. Evelyn's social circle had withered. Friends drifted away and calls became sparse. Her once proud family maintained their distance. Her parents, embarrassed, spoke less frequently. Her siblings resented the attention she had brought upon them. Her once active social media, filled with curated vacations and polished dinner parties, sat untouched. She had made everything private, but it was a futile effort. The damage was done. Messages from old friends trickled in, polite but distant. Some scolded her gently. Others hinted that associating with her was no longer an option. Evelyn brushed it off, convinced she had been right all along. One evening, her phone rang. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Rachel Parker, her childhood best friend. A flicker of hope ignited as Evelyn answered. "Rachel, I'm so glad you called." Rachel's tone cut through Evelyn's relief like ice. "Evelyn, I'm calling because I owe you honesty." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "I've tried to understand, but I can't stand by you anymore," Rachel said, frustration lacing her voice. "You humiliated yourself and hurt people." Evelyn's heart dropped. "Rachel, I didn't mean for any of this. People twisted my words. I'm not a bad person." Rachel sighed heavily. "Maybe you didn't mean to hurt anyone, but you still did, and you refused to admit it." Silence stretched between them. Rachel's voice softened but held firm. "This is goodbye, Evelyn. I hope someday you'll understand why." A quiet click ended the call, leaving Evelyn alone with nothing but the dull hum of her apartment. For the first time, the weight of loneliness pressed down harder than her pride. Maya Brooks' life, however, soared in a different direction. The incident that could have rattled her confidence became a defining chapter, one that sparked a national conversation on perseverance, diversity, and strength in the face of adversity. Invitations poured in from aviation conferences, leadership panels, and schools eager to hear her story. Maya accepted each opportunity with humility, not for fame, but to pave the way for others. One afternoon, while sifting through emails at her kitchen table, a message from a young girl named Mia Thompson caught her attention. "Dear Captain Brooks, I've always wanted to be a pilot, but people say it's not for girls. Seeing you fly that plane made me believe I can. Thank you for showing me that I belong." Maya smiled softly and began typing. "Mia, the sky is for everyone. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Work hard and keep dreaming. I know you'll get there one day. I'm cheering you on." Maya hit send, warmth spreading through her chest. It wasn't about awards or recognition. It was about making others believe they could achieve more than they ever imagined. As the sun dipped below the horizon outside her window, Maya realized something. She wasn't just flying planes. She was lifting others along the way. Part 11. The Path Forward. Captain Maya Brooks sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating a heartfelt email from a young, aspiring pilot named Mia Thompson. Mia had written about how Maya's grace during the incident on Flight 637 had reignited her determination to pursue aviation, despite the discouragement she often faced. Maya smiled as she read the message, her heart swelling with gratitude. She quickly typed a reply, sharing words of encouragement and offering to mentor Mia if she ever needed guidance. These connections were what kept Maya grounded. Each message reminded her why she flew, not for recognition, but to make space for others who dreamed of reaching the skies. Her story continued to resonate, and soon Maya found herself invited to prestigious aviation conferences. At one event in Chicago, she stood before a packed room, delivering a talk on resilience, professionalism, and the importance of diversity in the industry. Her voice was steady and clear as she spoke. "It's not about proving others wrong," Maya told the audience. "It's about proving to yourself that you are capable, worthy, and that you belong. No one can take that from you. Stand tall, because if you don't, someone else will try to silence you." The room erupted in applause, and Maya left the stage knowing her words had reached those who needed to hear them. Her family, especially her parents, watched her journey with pride. Her father, a retired teacher, often said, "We always knew she'd go far." That strength has been there since she was little. Her mother, while proud, couldn't help but worry about the toll the experience might take on Maya. But Maya reassured her, grateful for their unwavering support. They had always been her greatest champions. While Maya's career soared, Evelyn Carter's world continued to shrink. One morning, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through job listings. Despite her education and years of experience, every lead dissolved the moment employers searched her name. The viral videos, the countless articles, they were all still there. In desperation, Evelyn reached out to her former employer, pleading for another chance. But the response was polite and firm. The human resources director explained that her behavior had not only breached company policy, but had reflected poorly on their values. Evelyn stared at the email, her heart sinking. She hadn't just lost a job, she had lost her reputation. With no job prospects in sight, she was forced to downsize again, eventually moving into a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. Her pride was bruised, but she clung to her belief that the world had conspired against her. Even as friends drifted away and family kept their distance, Evelyn refused to acknowledge her fault. She viewed herself as the victim, convinced that the world was unjust. But the silence began to weigh on her. Messages slowed, calls ceased, and as she sat alone, Evelyn wondered, was there a lesson she was meant to learn? The thought flickered briefly before anger swept it away. For Maya Brooks, the journey was just beginning. Her presence grew as a prominent voice for diversity and inclusion in aviation. Podcasts, panels, and interviews flooded her inbox. Maya embraced each platform, using her experiences to inspire change and advocate for women and people of color in the industry. One evening, her phone rang. The familiar voice of her former co-pilot, Nick Harmon, greeted her warmly. "Maya, I've been following everything. You're practically a legend now." Maya laughed softly. "I wouldn't go that far, Nick. But thank you." They reminisced about old flights, and before hanging up, Nick left her with words that lingered in her heart. "You turned an ugly situation into something beautiful. Not many people can do that." After the call, Maya sat in quiet reflection. Her journey was no longer just about her own success. It was about opening doors for those who would follow. And she was ready. Her eyes were fixed on the future, full of hope and determination. Meanwhile, Evelyn Carter remained in her small apartment, watching life pass her by. The respect she once commanded, the social circles she once belonged to, it all felt like a distant memory. She scrolled mindlessly through her phone, her fingers pausing briefly on vacation photos and memories of happier times. But they felt like they belonged to someone else. Her world had become small and quiet, with little left to cling to but her pride. Captain Maya Brooks stood at the podium, the lights of the conference hall casting a soft glow across the crowd. Her eyes swept over the audience, pausing briefly when she spotted her mother, Helen Brooks, sitting quietly in the second row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Maya hadn't expected her to come, but seeing Helen's warm, proud smile settled the lingering nerves in Maya's chest. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I stand before you today not just as a pilot, but as someone who has faced challenges head-on and overcome them. We are all capable of resilience. And if there is one message I hope to share today, it's this: no dream is too high, and no barrier too strong to keep you from your path." Applause rippled through the room as Maya continued, weaving her experiences into words that resonated far beyond aviation. Meanwhile, Evelyn Carter sat quietly at a table in a small community center, the hum of activity around her fading into the background. Her life had become far removed from the glossy, privileged existence she once led. The downfall that began with Flight 637 had stretched long after the headlines faded, transforming into something much quieter, a slow, uncomfortable realization that she had been the architect of her own collapse. In the weeks following the incident, Evelyn had resisted change. Her pride had held fast, refusing to acknowledge the depth of the harm she had caused. But as the months passed, isolation had forced her to confront her reflection. She could no longer ignore the distance from friends, the shame from family, or the closed doors she encountered at every turn. One afternoon, with nowhere else to go, Evelyn wandered into a local library, a place she hadn't stepped into since childhood. There, surrounded by strangers and the comforting rustle of pages, she found something she hadn't expected: freedom. No one recognized her. No one whispered or stared. Evelyn pulled books from the shelves, books on social justice, empathy, and racial history. She didn't know why she chose them, only that something compelled her to sit down and read. The words were heavy at first, uncomfortable to digest, but as the days turned into weeks, discomfort shifted into curiosity, then understanding. Gradually, Evelyn began to take small steps toward rebuilding her life. She started volunteering at the community center, helping organize food drives and outreach programs in underprivileged neighborhoods. Not because she sought recognition, but because, for the first time, she wanted to give back. One day, as she sorted donations, a young girl named Alicia Reyes approached Evelyn, her wide eyes filled with excitement. "Hi, Miss Evelyn, can I tell you something?" Evelyn smiled softly. "Of course, Alicia." Alicia twirled the ends of her ponytail nervously. "I want to be a pilot someday, just like Captain Brooks." The mention of Maya's name hit Evelyn unexpectedly, like a wave crashing against the shore. Alicia's eyes glimmered with hope as she continued. "My mom says it's hard for girls like me, but I want to fly. I saw Captain Brooks on TV. She's my hero." Evelyn's heart twisted. She had spent so long resenting Maya, blaming her for the unraveling of her life. But hearing Maya's name now, spoken with such admiration, softened something within her. "That's a wonderful dream," Evelyn replied, masking the pang of regret rising in her chest. "And I think you can do it, Alicia. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." For the first time in months, Evelyn felt a flicker of pride, not in herself, but in knowing she had witnessed that strength firsthand. Maya's life continued to flourish, her schedule filled with speaking engagements, awards, and invitations to mentor young pilots. A feature in Aviation Leaders magazine hailed her as a trailblazer, a symbol of perseverance and leadership. Despite the recognition, Maya remained grounded, volunteering at local schools and mentoring students like Lila. Her days were long, but her heart felt full. As she prepared for the next leadership summit, Maya glanced over her notes, feeling a familiar calm settle over her. She was exactly where she was meant to be. As Maya stepped onto the stage that evening, Helen's proud gaze never left her daughter. Maya was no longer just a pilot. She was a force of change, lifting others, one flight at a time. Captain Maya Brooks sat by her window, the soft light of evening streaming through as she reread the letter in her hands. The words from the young woman, a girl she had met during one of her earliest school visits, echoed in her heart. "You once told me to never let anyone tell me I don't belong." Those words kept me going, even when things got tough. "Thank you for being my role model. I hope to make a difference, just like you." Maya folded the letter carefully, tucking it into a box filled with other keepsakes. Letters, drawings, and small tokens from young dreamers she had crossed paths with over the years. She leaned back, feeling the weight of her journey settle into a sense of calm. The years had been filled with challenges, but moments like this reminded her why she kept going. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alicia Reyes, the young girl who had dreamed of becoming a pilot. "Captain Brooks, I passed my aviation summer program entrance test. Thank you for believing in me." Maya smiled. "I always knew you could do it, Alicia. The skies are waiting for you." Across town, Evelyn Carter stood in front of a small group of young girls at the community center. Their eyes were bright with curiosity as they listened intently. Evelyn took a steadying breath, adjusting the stack of books she had brought to share. "I'm not a pilot," Evelyn began, "but I know what it feels like to doubt yourself. And I also know how important it is to have someone who tells you that you can do anything." Alicia sat in the front row, hanging on to Evelyn's words. "There are people who might not believe in you," Evelyn continued, "but what matters most is that you believe in yourself. Don't let anyone take that away from you." As she spoke, Evelyn felt a quiet shift within her. The weight of her past mistakes hadn't vanished, but this was something she could do. Later that afternoon, Alicia approached Evelyn. "Thank you, Miss Evelyn," she said softly. "I want to be like Captain Brooks, but I didn't know if I could." Evelyn knelt down, meeting Alicia's gaze. "You can," Evelyn replied, her voice gentle but firm, "and I'll be here to remind you of that whenever you need." Alicia grinned, nodding. Maya's career continued to flourish, but her heart remained grounded in the simple joy of inspiring others. She often thought of Evelyn, though they hadn't spoken since the incident. Maya wasn't sure if Evelyn's path had changed, but she hoped that in some way her story had left an impression. One day, while attending a local aviation event for young students, Maya noticed a familiar face standing at the back of the room. It was Evelyn. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither moved. Then slowly, Evelyn nodded, a silent acknowledgement, a quiet apology wrapped in the smallest of gestures. Maya returned the nod, a soft smile tugging at her lips. She didn't need words. They had both come far. As Maya addressed the room, speaking to the next generation of pilots, she glanced once more at Evelyn, grateful for the unexpected twists that had shaped her journey. The skies were open, and for Maya Brooks there was still so much more to explore. And the stories of others began to unfold around her. Evelyn Carter found herself confronting uncomfortable truths. The people in that room weren't so different from her. Some had acted out of ignorance, others from anger or fear. But each of them, in some way, had faced the same realization. Their actions had consequences far beyond what they intended. One evening, the group's facilitator, an older woman named Linda Matthews, asked Evelyn directly, "Why do you think you're here, Evelyn?" Evelyn crossed her arms, defensive. "I acted out of concern. I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand." Linda studied her for a moment, then replied, "Concern and prejudice can look very similar if you're not willing to examine them closely." Evelyn's chest tightened. For the first time, she didn't have a response. Weeks passed and Evelyn gradually stopped resisting the lessons. She began listening, really listening, to the stories shared by others. A construction worker who had lashed out at a coworker of a different background. A teacher who had unknowingly made biased comments that alienated her students. A store clerk who had refused service based on assumptions. Each person faced their own reckoning. And slowly, Evelyn saw herself in them. Meanwhile, Maya Brooks continued to rise, not just in her career, but in the lives of those she mentored. At one of her speaking engagements, Maya stood before a crowd of aspiring young aviators. "Resilience isn't about proving others wrong," Maya said, her voice calm and assured. "It's about proving to yourself that you belong." The audience erupted in applause. Among them sat Alicia Reyes, the young girl who had once confided in Evelyn about her dream to fly. Alicia's eyes shone with hope as she clapped enthusiastically, knowing she had found a role model in Captain Brooks. Months after completing her community service and sensitivity training, Evelyn Carter returned to the community center where she had once volunteered. She wasn't sure why she went back, perhaps out of habit, perhaps seeking some form of quiet redemption. Alicia spotted her from across the room. "Miss Evelyn," the girl called out, running over. "I'm still working toward being a pilot. I got into the aviation summer camp." Evelyn's heart softened at Alicia's excitement. "That's wonderful, Alicia," Evelyn said gently. "I'm proud of you." Alicia hesitated, then added, Captain Brooks said I should never stop believing in myself. The mention of Maya's name stung, but not in the way it once did. Instead, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in a long time. Humility. Captain Brooks is right, Evelyn replied, kneeling down to meet Alicia's gaze. And I'll keep cheering you on too. As Evelyn left the center that day, she carried a strange sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Her journey toward redemption wasn't over. It might never be. But for the first time, she felt like she was facing the right direction. And sometimes, that was enough. Maya Brooks stood at the front of a packed auditorium, her captain's stripes gleaming beneath the soft stage lights. Her heart raced, not from nerves, but from excitement. The moment felt surreal, a reflection of how far she had come. As she looked out over the eager faces of young cadets and aspiring pilots, Maya remembered the very day she had been sitting in the audience, wide-eyed and uncertain. Back then, it was Captain Maya Brooks' words that had anchored her. And now, years later, Maya had become that guiding voice for others. I know what it feels like to wonder if you belong, Maya began, her voice steady. To question if the skies are meant for someone like you. But I'm here to tell you, you belong wherever your heart takes you. The cockpit, the control tower, the front of this room. Nothing is out of reach. As she spoke, Maya caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Alicia Reyes, now a first-year cadet, wearing the crisp uniform of a flight academy student. Alicia's eyes sparkled with hope, her gaze fixed on Maya, hanging on every word. Meanwhile, across the city in a quieter corner of town, Evelyn Carter sat in the break room of the community center where she now volunteered twice a week. She stirred her tea absently, her thoughts drifting. It had been months since she sent the message to Captain Brooks. Maya hadn't replied, and Evelyn hadn't expected her to. But that wasn't the point. Writing the apology, facing the shame head-on, that had been Evelyn's turning point. For the first time, she saw herself not as a victim of public backlash, but as someone responsible for making things right, even if the process was slow and humbling. The work at the center wasn't glamorous. Sorting donations, organizing food drives, and helping underprivileged families didn't restore the life Evelyn once had, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. One afternoon, as she packed boxes of school supplies, she felt a small tug on her sleeve. Alicia stood beside her, beaming. Miss Evelyn, guess what? Alicia grinned, barely able to contain her excitement. I got accepted into the aviation summer program. Captain Brooks wrote me a recommendation. Evelyn's heart warmed. That's incredible, Alicia, Evelyn said, smiling softly. I knew you could do it. Alicia leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. One day, I'm going to be just like Captain Brooks. I want to fly planes and help other kids believe they can do it too. Evelyn's chest tightened with a familiar pang of regret, but this time it wasn't bitterness, it was hope. You're going to be even better, Evelyn replied, and I'll be here cheering you on. As months passed, Evelyn's journey of quiet redemption continued. She stayed out of the spotlight, content with the simplicity of rebuilding a life rooted in humility and service. One day, as she left the center, she noticed a small pin on her coat, the same silver airline logo pin Maya had once given to aspiring pilots. Evelyn didn't know how it had found its way to her, but she wore it proudly, a quiet reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys happen not in the air but on the ground, through small acts of growth, forgiveness, and the courage to face who you once were. Maya's career soared, but she remained grounded in the values Captain Brooks Francod instilled in her. She continued mentoring young pilots, speaking at events, and advocating for inclusion in aviation. Her legacy, like Maya's, wasn't built on titles or accolades, but on the lives she touched. And one day, when Maya stepped off a plane and saw Alicia waiting at the terminal in her pilot's uniform, she knew the cycle had come full circle. Together, they had risen above the clouds, fueled by resilience, unity, and the belief that the sky was big enough for everyone.